and welcome to today's Mind Health webinar. Today we're joined by retired psychotherapist Jerry Marzinsky, who you'll hear more about very soon. We're delighted to host speakers from around the world at the World Council for Health, and we welcome their different perspectives. Please keep in mind that the opinions of our guests do not necessarily represent the opinions of the World Council for Health. Our World Council for Health Mind Health webinar audience spans the whole world and includes people with different perspectives and experiences. If you feel differently than what you're hearing today, please feel free to share that in the chat where you're watching this. And if you're excited or inspired by something that you're hearing today, please also share that as well. And please do ask any questions that you may have. This episode is recorded live and it's not rehearsed, so therefore errors and omissions are always possible. If you would like to participate in the webinar itself, please join us in the Mind Health Committee webpage at worldcouncilforhealth.org/mindhealth. That's also where you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar after we're done. So if you'd like to revisit it at a later time, catch something that you missed, or share it, that's where you can find it. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kim to introduce our guest for today.
Thank you. So I'm going to just share a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today, or what Jerry's going to be talking about, and read a little bit about Jerry's background. So our title for today is Psychiatric Insanity: Big Pharma, the Psychiatric Mafia, and Why Patients Don't Get Well. According to psychotherapist Jerry Marzinsky, not all our thoughts are our own, and the psychiatric mafia have been underhandedly brainwashing us, the masses, for decades. In a world of social engineering, Jerry says it's important to know who is sponsoring your thoughts. Remember the movie Inception, where a team of people are hired to implant thoughts into people's minds? In this enlightening and sometimes shocking conversation, Jerry will share what he refers to as the demonology of psychology and the true history of mental illness. You will learn his perspective about medication and the so-called voices in your head, including 23 voice patterns, and a lot more besides. Come to this session prepared to have your understanding of modern psychology potentially turned on its head. So Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the country. Jerry is a commercial pilot, certified scuba diver, and long-distance motorcyclist. He's held the positions of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and assistant scoutmaster, and was awarded the state of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and the Pima College Apple Award of Teaching Abnormal Psychology. His formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology, a master's degree in counseling, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He's the co-author of the book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. So welcome, Jerry, and other Jerry. I'll hand it over to Jerry now. The Jerry with the G, Jerry.
Okay.
Just call me Pives today. That'll be fine. Yeah, thank you. And Jerry, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. I just want to, excuse me, I just want to say to all the listeners that this is a very challenging subject that we're going to be dealing with. And if you feel that you are likely to be overwhelmed or triggered or in some way disturbed by hearing some very profound thoughts around the darker side of psychiatry, then I really want you to keep checking in with yourself and just remove yourself for protection. Remember, this will be recorded, so you can always come back to it at a later point. What we want to do is we don't want to restrict the conversation and the depth of the conversation, but we also want you to be aware that what's coming up is very deep and very profound. And it's something just to be aware of. And if you feel in any way overwhelmed, take care of yourself. The flip side of that is you might find this incredibly liberating to hear if you have been the victim of psychiatric care. So I just really want to say, take responsibility for yourself, look after yourself. And if you start to feel distressed, take care of yourself, leave the seminar, and you can always come back to it at a later point when you're feeling a little bit more robust. Is that fair to say, Jerry, if as an introduction?
Yeah, I don't think many, if there are very few people, I think will be triggered by this. I think they'll find the information liberating.
Wonderful. Well, let's kick off with that. That's a hell of an introduction that's been read to you, Jerry, by Kim, and I know that it was put together from your information. Yeah, tell us a bit about. I mean, your work experience sounds remarkable, and you've been working for a long time with some very disturbed people. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a picture of what you learned in that process and what that was like?
Well, I learned that what I was taught in the universities wasn't true. You know, taking all this stuff from the universities, and I went through BA master's program into PhD psychology, looking for answers, and they didn't have any. You know, so I know we're limited on time, so I'm going to kind of do a quick sketch. Is I started off not trusting authority. I mean, that from the time I was a small kid, I was taught not to trust authority. So I did trust the universities, and when I graduated with a graduate degree, went to work at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals in the United States, if not on the planet. I think I remember there were like 10,000 patients there when I got there, and
Wow.
so I started looking around at what was happening, and a lot of things didn't make sense to me. Okay. One of the first things that struck me was that a number of these patients were schizophrenic and they were hearing voices. Right? And nobody out of the hundreds of staff in this place was interested in what those voices was telling them. You know, they were all brainwashed to believe that these things were hallucinations. And I was too. When I started off, I was too. And I asked psychiatrists, I asked psych nurses, I asked, all these other staff, what are the voices? And for the most part, it was, well, they're hallucinations due to a chemical imbalance in the patient's brain. Okay, fine. So if you got a chemical imbalance, you would think that they would want a baseline of what that chemical imbalance was so they could correct whatever the balance was. I mean, that only makes sense that there should be some kind of lab work, some kind of EEG, EKG, blood work, something to tell these psychiatrists which of the neurotransmitters in the brain, I think there's like 23 of them or something like that, are out of balance or by how much. So if you're going to correct something, you need to know how far off it is. I never, ever saw a psychiatrist the entire 7 years I was at this hospital give any kind of blood work, lab tests, any kind of objective test to determine what chemicals in the brain were off or by how much. So that's the first thing that struck me. It's like, this doesn't make sense. If it's a chemical imbalance, this doesn't make sense. So, I started looking into it. And what happened was there was a drug company, Eli Lilly, who back in the 70s, when they came out with Prozac, just made up this chemical imbalance thing. They just made it up out of thin air. There was no proof for it. They had no evidence for it at the time. They just made it up to try to explain why Prozac worked. Okay? And so then psychiatry jumped on it, the universities jumped on it, and the universities are controlled by the drug companies. Make no doubt about that. The drug companies control what the universities put out, what's published, how much money they get for publishing what's allowed to be published. They have a huge influence, a monetary influence on the universities, which were taken over back in the 1900s by the Carnegie Foundation, who bought off Congress and said, okay, you cannot graduate medical students who are not who do not go through a pharmacological curriculum. So you need to study drugs. You need to be prescribing drugs. Right? And who was that? It was
Flexner.
I forgot. Yeah, the Flexner report. But I was trying to think of the multimillionaire who paid off the Congress to pass that. So it resulted in the Flexner report, which basically said,
wasn't it the Rothschilds doing that?
I think it might
or was
have
it the
been
Rockefeller?
Rothschilds, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, those three, Rockefeller, Rothschild, and
Rockefeller.
Carnegie.
It was Rockefeller.
Rockefeller, okay. Yeah.
So they passed laws that, and it took off from there. So here they are teaching thousands of psychologists and psychiatrists that mental illness is due to a chemical imbalance of the brain, and there's no objective evidence for it. Matter of fact, it's been disproved over and over and over again. And they're still doing it. I pulled up an article a month ago saying, but they changed their verbiage a little bit. They go, oh, it is believed it's a chemical imbalance of the brain. Okay. So they started out blaming mothers, back in the 50s. So the mothers did something to make their kids psychotic. And it's like the mothers went, well, we didn't do anything. What are you talking about? What did we do? So what they had to do is kick it up somewhere out of the purview of the general public and practitioners and psychiatrists and doctors. So they kick it up to the chemical imbalance thing. Who can investigate that? Nobody. And here they are putting out this propaganda. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain with no evidence whatsoever. Finally, some honest biochemists looked into that and said, hey, we don't see any chemical imbalance of the brain. What are you talking about? So they wigged out on that, and it's like, well, what are we going to do now? At first, they started off with genetics. It was like, oh, it's a genetic abnormality. And the geneticists are saying we don't see any gene for schizophrenia. We don't see it. So then they jumped it up and went, well, it's not just one gene, it's a whole bunch of different genes, and they're interacting in all these crazy ways that, we don't know how it's doing, but we're sure it's genetic. They didn't find any marker for that. They didn't find any biochemical imbalance. What they did find is that these antipsychotic drugs that they were using were shrinking the brains of these long-term patients who were using them. Okay. So they started doing autopsies on these patients that were psychotic in state hospitals, and they were finding consistently that their brains were shrunk like walnuts. So these honest researchers wrote up a paper on that, and it hit the deep state psychiatric mafia and big pharma, and they wigged out going, oh, it's not our drugs, it's not our drugs, it's the schizophrenia doing this. And the researchers started feeding these antipsychotic drugs to rats and monkeys and mice and found that their brains shrunk also. So these drugs that they're using are actually neurotoxins. They are killing the brain. They're shrinking the brain and the peripheral nervous system with long-term use. So here's all these things coming out that are flying in the face of what they're teaching in the universities. Now, you look at the entire 40-some years I've been on the front lines of mental health, I have never, ever seen a researcher on the front lines, ever. They don't let them on the front lines. They won't let them into the mental hospitals. They won't let them into the mental health centers. They won't let them into the private psychiatric centers. They go, oh, it's too dangerous, or we can't take the risk. So all this stuff is coming from the universities. And those people in the universities don't have a lot of frontline experience. When I was in the PhD program, the most experienced professor there had worked in student health in the university or a mental health center. That was it. They weren't on the real front lines. They're not doing research. So what they're putting out are fallacies. And among those fallacies are what the voices are. Okay? So what I noticed when I went to work in this giant psychiatric hospital was I didn't know what the voices were. I thought they were hallucinations when I started too. I mean, because that's what they're teaching. Yeah. And that's what everybody else thought too. But nobody was curious about what these voices were telling these people. And I could see clearly that whatever they were affecting the patient's behavior in a very bad way. They would trigger them into fights. They would get them to self-sabotage. If they were listening to the voices, they were in some kind of trouble. Okay. Now, the medications weakened the voices. They weakened abnormal behavior. So they attenuated all the patient's behavior downward and kind of turned them into semi-zombies. They were not functioning as normal people anymore. They were drugged up. And that was great for the psychiatric hospital. They didn't have to fight anybody. They didn't have to wrap them up in straitjackets. They just drugged down the whole population. It was wonderful as far as they were concerned. And they calmed them down, and the voices weren't as strong, but for the most part, they didn't go anywhere. The voices were still there. Okay? Nobody was interested in what these voices were telling these people. I was. So I started asking them, what are they telling you? And one after another. And there were plenty of schizophrenics in this place. It was an endless supply. So what I found, the first thing I found is that the common, most consistent trait of what these schizophrenic voices were they were consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. They didn't wander from that. And it was patient after patient after patient after patient, scores of them, all telling me the same thing. The voices are nasty, they're abusive, they're telling me I'm rotten, I'm no good, I'm stupid, I'm ugly, everybody hates me, people are laughing at me. All that rotten crap, every rotten thing that you could think of that you could tell a person, that's what these things are telling these patients. And when I first got there, throughout 6 years of higher education, here they are saying the voices are hallucinations. So what I thought was they're word salad. They don't make any sense. They're just garbage. They're goobly goop. They're incomprehensible. It was far from that when I started looking into it. When you see one of these guys and you start watching them, it's like listening to somebody talking on a telephone. You can hear one side of the conversation. You can't hear what the voices are saying, but you can hear the patient's response to them. So I found that very interesting because I was thinking these things are like word salad. They don't make any sense because you think hallucinations, they're all over the place. They don't make any sense. This was wrong. They were making perfect sense. These people were carrying on coherent, long-term conversations with these voices. They were arguing with them. They were fighting with them. They were talking with them. It was a long conversation. So they weren't what I thought they were. Now, it took me probably a year to figure out how to talk to these people about their voices, because they don't call them paranoid schizophrenics for nothing. they don't want to talk about the voices. And I found out indeed later that the voices don't want them telling anybody about them either. So the more I looked into these voices, the more consistent it was that they were negative, abusive, and didn't wander from that path. So the question became, is why don't they wander from that negative trajectory? It's like somebody fires a cannon shell and it's following this certain trajectory and it's not wavering from that trajectory. Why aren't these voices random? Why don't they sometimes say something good, something bad, something neutral? It's not like that. It's consistently negative all the time. And this is information coming in from scores of different schizophrenics. So when I got something like that, I would start asking the other schizophrenics, hey, what are these voices? What are they like? What do they tell them? So what happened was one patient got upset that I was asking him about his voices. He went to a psychiatrist and told the psychiatrist, hey, he's asking me about the voices that upset me. I don't like that. Next morning, I found myself in the psychiatrist's office on the red carpet being told the voices are hallucinations. With you talking and asking questions about the voices, you are reinforcing them and making the patient worse. And he ordered me to stop. That happened twice. The psychiatric mafia don't even want you asking questions about the voices. So I knew that was bullcrap from the start. I was already way too far down that rabbit hole. So the next series of patterns So I'm looking at this, and it's running a pattern. This is a fixed pattern. And I'm like, if it's running a pattern, it can't be a hallucination. Hallucinations don't run patterns. And then a second pattern popped up. One patient came in and he goes, I've been reading the Bible, I've been praying the 23rd Psalm, and the voices hate the 23rd Psalm. They react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So I went, well, that's interesting. Put it in the back of my head. And then I started handing out the 23rd Psalm to other schizophrenic patients and saying, hey, I'll call you in next week. Let me know how your voices react to the 23rd Psalm.
Sorry, what is the 23rd Psalm? I'm not familiar.
It's the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. It goes on like that. It's basically, the Lord is with you. He's with you through the valley of the shadow of death. He's there with you. They didn't want any part of that. The voices reacted vehemently to that psalm. They react vehemently to the patients reading the Bible. They would react vehemently to the patient going into a church. So I started doing a little bit of research on that, and they started asking these schizophrenics, well, what happens when you go into a church? It broke down into 3 different levels. If the voices were weak, they would shut up in the church. If they were moderate strength, they would kick up, start mocking the preacher, start mocking the Bible, telling the patient that this guy's full of crap, don't listen to him. And this is consistent. If they were very strong, they would actually have the patient jump up and run out of the church. Again, this was a survey with scores of different patients on it. So these things are anti-religious. They don't like the Bible. They don't like the person reading the Bible. And I've talked to a number of patients who were, they going, well, there's something to the Bible. I'm going to stick reading it. And the voices tell them, okay, if you're going to read the Bible, you have to read it from cover to cover. You can't just read it any way you want. So the patient goes, okay, if you leave me alone, I'll read it from cover to cover. So they get to that part in the Bible where this guy begat that guy, and who begat who for 200 years. It goes on for pages. Once the patient hits that, the voices jump in and go, why are you reading this garbage? Look at this. It's dribble. You're wasting your time. Don't just forget that crap, to try to drive them away. And that happened over and over again. It happened a number of times. They do not like preachers. They do not like Bibles. They do not like churches. What kind of hallucination consistently hates religion? Consistently, we're talking about scores of people, and at this point it's hundreds. Another pattern has appeared. Okay. So second pattern, again, if the voices are running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. All right. Third pattern appeared is they want the patient upset. Everything they say, everything they do is aimed at upsetting that patient, making them paranoid, making them anxious, making them feel guilty, shameful. It's negative. So they're bringing down their vibration into a negative level. Now, what I noticed, and I didn't know where this came from or what was actually happening, was that I noticed that before the voices attacked these schizophrenic patients, they had a fair amount of energy. After the voices attacked, their energy levels dropped to nothing. And they didn't even notice that. I found that out with a few of them. Then I started asking the rest. And sure enough, when you ask them, now they don't realize it on their own, but you ask them, how much energy do you have before the voices attacked? How much energy do you have after they attacked? Sure enough, almost every single one of them said, I have much less energy after the voices came and attacked. So what I did is got two questionnaires, 1 to 10. How much energy do you have before the voices attacked? Circle 1 to 10. How much energy do you have after the voices attacked? Circle 1 to 10. We did an analysis of variance on it, and it was statistically significant. So where's that energy going? The patients aren't using it. They're laying in their beds all night listening to voices. They're hearing these voices all day long. They're not using that physical energy, right? But it's consistently gone. Right? So there was another pattern. They energetically drain their victims. Yeah. And you can ask the schizophrenic, like, okay, you've been hearing these voices for years. They've come to you thousands of times. Every time they hit you, your energy disappears. You didn't use it. Where did it go? And they sit there, I don't know. They're being blocked from realizing that. Every once in a while, one would say, they take it? Yeah. And with the ones who go, I don't know, I would say, well, if you stuck your hand in a fire 1,000 times, and every time you stuck your hand in the fire, you got burned, what's burning you? They had no trouble with, oh, it's the fire. But if you say, okay, the voices have come thousands of times over the years. Every time they come, you were drained of energy. What do you think took your energy? I don't know. They're being blocked. They can get that one, but they couldn't get the other. Something is blocking them from that knowledge. Now, the last 10 years, I've spent working doing psych crisis in all the major hospitals around Tucson. In those hospitals, they didn't want you working with patients. They wanted you getting psych patients out of the ERs. They didn't want you spending time with them. So what I was doing was thinking, like, what is the most important bit of information I can give these people to help them out when they get out of here? Because I knew the drugs weren't going to help them. That all it was going to do was dumb them down, and that's what they were going to do. The ones who realized that the voices weren't them, and I have to talk about that too. I would tell them, I'd run them through that scenario. They would realize that the voices were taking their energy. They were draining their energy, and the voices would get furious. They would get absolutely furious. That's the last thing they wanted that patient to know, was that they were taking their energy, that they were parasites. Now, all of you out there who are schizophrenics or have schizophrenic relatives or work with schizophrenics, ask them. You'll see that everything I'm saying is true. Ask them. It's out there. These things are running patterns. Right? So they
Jerry,
energetically drain their victim.
Ask a question. If the voices are not hallucinations, what are they then?
Well, let me tell you how I found that out. And it was startling. Okay. So what I kept doing was finding these patterns that the voices were running, more and more of them. There's 23 right now. You can find them on my website under jerrymarzinsky.com. Go to articles. They're all there. You can see for yourself. It's not a biochemical imbalance hidden anywhere. You can get this list of patterns. You can check it out for yourself and see that schizophrenics are running these patterns and that these voices are running these patterns. And if they're running these patterns, they're not hallucinations. Number one. Okay. So I didn't know what these voices were. I knew they were bad, and more and more evidence was coming in as every year passed that these things were something that was out to destroy the patient, and they were doing it on purpose, maliciously. Right? So I really couldn't investigate really closely when I was at the state hospital because the psychiatrists had me under orders. You will not ask them questions about their voices. However, after I got out of the PhD program, I found a job in the psychology department of the state prison in Arizona. Okay? Now, that was a totally different story. If a schizophrenic patient went up to the warden or the captain of the unit and said, "Oh, the psychologist has asked me too many questions about the voices and I don't like it," they would go, "Get out of my face, man. Go play in the traffic. Get out of here." It wouldn't even reach the level of concern. They wouldn't even be, it wouldn't it wouldn't hit any kind of threshold. It'd be well below the threshold of anything that would concern administration. So I was free to experiment as much as I wanted there. And I would spend hours talking to these schizophrenics, really getting deep into what these voices were, how they operated, what they were telling them, how they reacted to different things. So I started throwing monkey wrenches into these patterns and to see what would happen. I'm going, okay, if they're running patterns, if you disrupt those patterns, what's going to happen? So what I had was a group of maybe 10 to 13 schizophrenics, all hearing voices, who agreed in real time to tell me what those voices were telling them when we were in session. Okay. So it would always be like a conversation. Well, the voices are now telling me that you're full of crap, you're stupid, you're a jerk. What you're saying makes no sense. Why am you wasting your time with them? You know, and I'd say, well, tell the voices to go stick their heads in the toilet, and they would be the interpreter. Okay, between it, and I would be able to talk to the voices via the patient, which was interesting. And we're talking about coherent conversations here. This isn't nonsense. This isn't word salad. These are coherent conversations that we're carrying on with these things. All right. Now, they didn't like talking to me. They didn't like me much at all. So what happened is as I'm giving these 13 schizophrenic inmates homework, you know, do this, come back next week, tell me what effect it had on the voices. Okay. Eventually, they all started coming back one at a time, and most of them didn't know each other. I mean, it's a big prison unit. They'd come in and they go, the voices don't like you. They don't like doing this. They don't like what you're doing. They don't want me to come here. Every morning I get up, they say, don't go there. You're wasting your time. You know, so there's a lot of resistance on that. Okay. So they all started coming back with the same feedback. The voices don't like this. They don't like you interfering with these patterns. They don't like you. They don't like what you're doing. So fine, you know, they're in their heads. They can't come out of there. They can't get me. I ain't worried about it. You know? So then the second warning got fired across my bow. I kept going. I kept throwing things into these patterns that would screw them up, finding out what happened, finding out better ways to throw these voices off. And prayer was one of them. 23rd Psalm was one of them. Okay. So here comes this one patient that I've been working with for 6 months. We finished a session, went pretty well. He turns around in my doorway of my office and he looks at me and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I just looked at him. I like, it never crossed my mind. You know, I'm thinking, well, they're in your head. They're not coming out of your head. I'm good. But it got my attention. I stuck it in the backpack and went, well, okay, I'll keep it for future reference. It was like, that's interesting. You know, that's the first time any of them had told me what I was doing was dangerous. Okay, so I kept persisting. Next thing that happened is one of them came in and he got into the medical unit somehow without a pass. I don't know how he did that. He knocked on my door, opened it up, and here's this fellow I've been working with for months and months. And he said, the voices want to talk to you. And I'm like, they want to talk to me personally? He goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. And I'm like, okay. That had never happened before. In 20 years or more prior, that had never happened before. All the interaction went through the patient. So I said, come on in. Have a seat. I closed the door. And I said, what do they got to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I was like, boom, my head just exploded. I mean, my denial system was already on the verge of collapse. I mean, there was so much evidence coming in that these things were not random. They were not hallucinations, that they had a consciousness all their own. It was very destructive. It was very negative. Okay. And I just kept patching up my denial system. Going, oh, it must be something with their subconscious mind. It'll come out sooner or later. When that happened, it was like, boom, that denial system just collapsed. You know, I closed my door, said, they are entities. They are entities. You know? And I just stared out the window the rest of the day. I canceled all my appointments. And it was like, what am I getting into? What exactly are these things? How dangerous are they? I don't have any cognitive map. Nobody's ever done this before. I don't know where it's leading me. And I don't like where it seems to be going. Okay? But I guess the saving grace in the whole situation was that I'm a hopeless adrenaline junkie. If I wasn't an adrenaline junkie, I don't think I would have gone that far. You know? So I kept working with these guys. And then I ran into a book called The Voice of Knowledge by Miguel Ruiz. He's a South American shaman. Okay? So he he was writing about these things also. He wasn't calling them voices. He was calling them entities or something to that effect. And I hit that part. And I went, okay, I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to bring the guy who told me the voices are the one whose voices told me I have no right to interfere with their way of life. That was the same guy. So I brought him in, sat him down, and I said, and I was always asking him questions. I was constantly battering them with questions. So I brought this book in. I said, hey, I want to read you this paragraph. I want your opinion on what it says, just to see how he would react to it. Because I noticed these things were energy parasites. This shaman noticed they were energy parasites. So I started reading the thing, and it got to the point where it actually came out and said, these things are energy parasites. They're stealing the energy of these humans. And I look at him, and he's got this glazed over stare. I don't know if you've ever seen a psychotic when they go into that kind of stare. Just this vacant eye stare, and he's just looking at me, And I asked him, well, what do you think? He doesn't respond. He's just staring at me with this glazed over focused stare. And then all of a sudden I hear this electrical crackling erupt from behind my chair, and it was loud. It sounded just like an arc welder. It's like crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what in the blazes is going on? And I look at him, and he's still staring at me with that weird stare. And I go, he's going to attack. So I push my chair against the wall so I can kick him back if he does. Because all they had in the medical unit then were female guards. It would have been over by the time they got there. And there's nothing they would have been able to do much anyway. So I'm preparing for an attack, and I'm hearing this loud crackling. I can't see anything. It goes onto the right-hand wall of my office and starts crackling at a 45-degree angle all the way up the wall. It sounded just like an arc welder. Crack, 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 crack. I don't see any light. I don't smell anything. I don't see anything. I don't feel anything. I just hear it, and it's moving. Right? So I look at him and I said, do you hear that? He doesn't respond. He's still staring at me with this vacant, glassy stare. And I'm freaked out. I mean, not only am I'm thinking this guy's going to attack, I'm like, what in the blazes is going on here? It's like totally mind warping. So, and this wasn't any brief thing. It lasted for about 25, 30 seconds, crackling up the wall. Then it goes on up to the top of the ceiling at the back wall and starts crackling across the back wall. So I'm trying to see what it is, but I can keep my eye on this prisoner and kind of follow the sound with my eyes at the same time. So I had the whole situation in view. And then it jumps onto the left wall and starts crackling down the left wall at a 45-degree angle. Crack, 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 loud, just like an arc welder. And then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can right next to my leg. And I bend over and I look down in there, and there's nothing there. There's not even a sheet of paper in there. The inmate porter cleaned it the night before. It's completely empty. And here's this crackling sound coming from the trash can right next to my leg. And then boom, just like that, it's done. Over. Shut up. Silence. And I look at this guy, and he's still got that glazed stare, and he slowly gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. And he shuffles out of the office. And I go, yeah, get out of here. Go. And I'm like, yeah, go. And he shuffles down the hall. I get up and I start examining the walls. There's no burn marks. There's no evidence that anything ever happened there. I walk out into the hallway to see if anything could account for this noise. The doctor isn't in yet. The nurses aren't in yet. Nobody's there. The medical unit is empty except for me. And boom, my head just went bam. It was like, what is going on here? I started feeling like I was going crazy, and there was nobody I could talk to about this.
So Jerry, I just need to interrupt because we're just, believe it or not, 45 minutes in. It feels like you, and I don't know what other Jerry thinks. It feels like you're talking about a sort of I wouldn't say a possession type of thing, but a demonic type something happening.
Well,
So
I would say they are evil spirits at the least. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg, Christian mystic, he wrote about these things 300 years ago. And what I noticed, and what a psychologist, a clinical psychologist at the time, Wilson Van Dusen, noticed, we started communicating with each other because I was studying Swedenborg, he was studying Swedenborg. We both saw that the patterns that Swedenborg brought up as to what these negative spirits or these demonic spirits, the way they acted was exactly the same way that these voices reacted.
One question I have, and I'd love to hear what questions you have, Jerry. You've been making lots of notes. I'm sure you've got a million questions, but a lot of people have negative thinking. They're not schizophrenics, but a lot of people have negative thinking towards themselves. Would you say that is like a lesser version of what you're talking about, or something different?
I would. I'd say it's exactly the same thing. Psychology and psychiatry never ask the question where the thoughts come from. Never. See, and these negative entities, they play on that because we believe that every thought that enters our head belongs to us and is us. So what they do is they insert these negative thoughts into your thought system as if they're your own. Now, I'd ask, a lot of these schizophrenic patients would ask these voices, who are you? What are you? The response was, we are you. If they believe that, then they become them. It's very dangerous. Everybody gets hit with these things. You might be standing on a bridge and you go, I wonder what it'd be like to jump. Or, driving your car and you go, well, I wonder what it'll be like to drive into oncoming traffic. Everybody gets hit by these things. They don't come from you. And you can feel it. When one of them hits you, it's shocking. It's like, how could I even entertain a thought like that? It's so disgusting and it's upsetting. That's what they want. They insert those into your thought stream. Okay. So these things are energetic entities. Yeah.
Jerry, I have absolutely no difficulty in believing every word you say. You're a sane man. You're talking in a functional way. You're interacting with us. And yet there's going to be people that are going to say, man, that Jerry Marzinsky, he lost the bloody plot.
I don't care. I'm telling you as I saw it. I mean, there's nothing to you could have the chief psychiatrist of the world come up and go, yeah, you're full of crap. Tough beans. This is what I experienced. This is what I saw truth. This is what hundreds and hundreds of schizophrenics have told me. You haven't investigated the voices once. You haven't done one research on any of these voices. You don't know what they are. You don't know how they act. You don't know the patterns they run. You think they're hallucinations and your medicines don't work. You are the one that's full of crap, not me.
I'm completely with you. I have no problem with a single word that you've said. In fact, I would validate much that you've said from my lifetime of working as a psychotherapist, because, for the last few years in particular, I've been wondering what the difference is between psychotherapy and exorcism. And I have been sensing that the work that I'm doing with people is about them finding ways to, as it were, expel dark thoughts and dark voices and to replace it with something really beautiful and full of light. And I come from a Christian tradition personally, but I can never work in that tradition because that's not my contract. And I'm in serious doubt now whether I should give up psychotherapy and train in the priesthood in order to help people better.
No, I think what you should do is go to become a MACE therapist. So what we're dealing with MACE is they call them negative identities. So during a trauma, all your attention is turned on you.
Yes.
Okay. Most of these psychological problems occur during a trauma. Okay.
Absolutely.
So you're overwhelmed with this negative feeling. It's non-functional. It's not life-giving. It interferes with your work. You can't function with it. So the ego jumps in and goes, "Hey, I'll handle this." Takes it and buries it in the subconscious and locks it down. But it's buried alive. So it's still affecting your thoughts, your behavior, your actions, your decisions. It's still there in the background. So what it feels like is when you run into a trauma in the world that is similar to the one that's buried, there's a fight or flight response. Go attack that guy, get him out of your face. He's the one making you feel bad. Attack him. It's got nothing to do with you. It's got nothing to do with this buried trauma. You don't even know it's there. Okay. But there's constant reaction, and the universe keeps sending you those kind of people over and over again. Every time that triggers, it gets bigger and more massive and stronger. Okay, so what MACE goes in there, it goes in there and it removes that psychological charge from that trauma. Okay, so there's no longer a emotional reaction to it. You still remember the trauma as bad as it was, but it doesn't affect you anymore. So we're talking about energy again. So it's the same thing as when you get a big magnet. There's a big magnetic field over that. You can't see it. You can't feel it. For all practical purposes, you can't sense that magnetic field. Okay? What psychiatry is doing is like pouring Thorazine on top of that magnetic field and expecting it to dissipate. It ain't going nowhere. Those voices don't go anywhere. When they drug these people, they get less because it calms them down. Those drugs are basically major tranquilizers, but the voices don't go anywhere. They're still there. And with exorcism, if you don't change the person's vibration, I mean, they can get rid of those things and they'll go. But it's like the Bible says, you can clean out the house, but if you don't refill it with something positive, they're going to come back sevenfold. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again. That's why I'm saying MACE will take care of that. It will handle most psychological problems permanently. It's not just beating it over the bush and talking about it over and over. And what's so amazing about it is that the therapist doesn't even have to know what that trauma was. It still works because it's energetic.
Yeah, so and there are many different modalities for doing exactly the same thing. MACE
I have not seen any in my experience. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Okay, you have, but I'm telling you, I know this works.
So, Jerry, where do people find out more about MACE? If they want to explore what MACE is, where do they go for that?
They can go to causisminstitute.com. So it's www.causism, CAUSISM, institute, INSTITUTE.com. All one line. Okay, there will be a listing of.
Can you spell causism again?
CAUSISM.
Institute.
Institute.com. Now the reason MACE called it causism because it goes after the cause of psychological problems. That's why he calls it causism. It doesn't just beat around the bush and talk about it. It actually removes the cause.
So, Jerry, this is fascinating. I have a kind of an off-the-wall question, but but these energy parasites that said you had no right to interfere with their life and their way of being. These energy parasites, how do they legitimize or justify their right to interfere with any human's life?
Oh, I'm muted, Jerry.
Say again, Jerry. You're muted. We can't hear you.
We could say what are these entities doing, eh?
The demonic forces have stopped him from speaking.
You're muted, Jerry. You need to unmute. You need to unmute.
You need to unmute, Jerry.
I guess that was the wrong question, eh?
While he's coming back, let me just read a couple of other questions that have come up in the in the chat. Has Jerry ever asked the patients what they are saying when they argue with the voices, and has he asked who is the patient talking with the voices? Didn't quite make sense.
Can I just say that, Jerry, your microphone is showing as if it's switched off at your end.
Yes, it is. Maybe if you leave and come back in, Jerry, on the same link, might be easier.
We just can't hear you, mate.
It's showing that you're muted, though. You need to unmute.
We can't hear you.
How bizarre.
My lip reading is not so good. Let's call on the magnificent Emma.
Well, actually, I cannot unmute him because it says that his mic is now disconnected. So I
Someone disconnected his mic.
still
This
says
is
he has no mic connected.
And come back,
this is
Jerry.
validation. This is validation of what Jerry's talking about, because someone has disconnected his mic in this talk about such an important subject. And I think leave and join us, Jerry. Try leaving us and joining us again.
Yeah, press the red leave studio cross, and then just click the link that you used the first time to join.
Down at the bottom.
I just want to share something quickly, because it's something that I've studied a bit over the years, which I found very, very fascinating about negative entities, is that we have the human kingdom, human beings. We have the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, etc. Well, one kingdom that is not taught about and talked about generally in society is what is called the Davic kingdom, the kingdom of Devas, to which both demons and angels belong. And this is a dimension of existence which exists in parallel and overlapping to the human kingdom, which is responsible for everything that is in manifest form. And these demonic entities or angelic entities, they are actually real beings, so to speak, but in another dimension. And so when we have these entities, they are actually a form, but not in physical form. And so to me, this makes a lot of sense with when we're talking about what Jerry has been talking about. And it's just not something that we're taught about generally. You don't go to school and have lessons in the Davic kingdom, but it is something that you can go and learn about if you're interested.
Can you hear me now?
Jerry?
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome
Good.
back.
So this happens all the time. This is common. If it doesn't happen, I'm surprised.
Well, I think you've just had a very phenomenological piece of evidence of what you're talking about while you're talking about it. So I think it validates what you're saying.
Yeah. So what makes these things so dangerous is that they will put thoughts into your thought stream. These are energetic entities. Okay.
But they work.
If you believe those thoughts, if you believe those thoughts, you become them. Yeah, they work through traumas. So they will feed off of trauma.
Say again.
They will feed off of trauma. They will trigger trauma and then pour gasoline on it.
So this is exactly where I have come to after 40 years of my work. I have seen how trauma always lies at the root of people's negative beliefs. There's no such thing as, it's almost as if the trauma creates a wound, and into that wound is where the dark energy or the dark thoughts thrive. It's like they feed off pain.
They do. And I've even had a couple of people tell me that they hang around those trauma sites and wait for them to be triggered, and then they'll just pour gasoline on the fire. And you look at the animal kingdom. I mean, you don't see animals going, "Oh, I said the wrong thing. What are they going to think? How am I going to feel? Oh, next time, what am I going to do?" You don't see any of that. With humans, it's like, "Oh no, I said something wrong. What are they going to think? How am I going to be?" Well, it goes on and on and on. Everybody's got this voice gabbing in their head, just constantly chattering away, telling you stuff you already know, telling you stuff that's bad, telling you stuff that's upset you. Ask yourself, if that's who you really are, then who is listening to that dribble?
There's lots of comments coming on here in the comments, and there's a lot of very positive comments about and validating comments about what you're saying. Delinda, do you want to ask your question of Jerry, because he got cut off and we'll see if he gets cut off again.
I was just wondering how these energetic parasites justify interfering with human lives?
Well, there's different levels of them. So you're getting into a whole different thing there. They have their like Nephilim commanders, and then they have lieutenants and sergeants. Then you got the ground troops, which are the voices. Okay? The voices are told they have no light in them, that if they don't obey their masters and suck this energy out of people, then they will cease to exist. Okay? So they're told lies. And what's so interesting about it is that you can take one of these voices and say, okay, let's go take a look. Let's go see if you have light in you. And then just carry them down until they will see a light. And it's a very dim orange light. And what amazes me is when they see it, they're furious. They're furious at the higher ups that told them that they had no light in them. And that just never ceases to amaze me, because they're consummate liars. They lie about everything. But when they were lied to about having light in them, they go nuts. They get furious. They get absolutely furious. And you can walk them out into the light if they're willing to go, because they have to turn over to their higher ups a good portion of the energy that they steal from people. So they don't get it all themselves. They have to pass it on up the line. It's like the IRS.
So is this sort of like, really, are we talking about good and evil here?
Well, everything has light. Everything's composed of light. Even these entities, they don't have much light, but they have some light. But they don't believe it. It's so they're basically slaves to the higher ups. Kind of like us in the U.S. are slaves to the IRS.
There's a beautiful quote just come in from Robin saying on the comments, saying one does not, he quotes Carl Jung. He says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's an interesting quote, isn't it?
Well, I think we make the darkness conscious today.
So what would you say, what advice would you give people, anybody here who's experienced either minor versions of negative thinking towards themselves? Because I've experienced that one driving along the road, and it definitely makes a difference what sort of state I'm in. If I'm in a good, state or a not so good state, is like, I wonder what would happen if I drove into oncoming traffic. I've had that thought. So, people could have had, and I've had a lot of negative thinking towards myself. Is what advice would you give people either who are on the lighter end of the spectrum of negative thoughts, or the really intense end of the spectrum? What could you leave people with as useful solutions?
Well, my coworker, my co-author in this book, I don't know if I showed this to you. This talks about how we discovered that the voices were voices, that these were entities. So Sherry Sweeney, my co-author, she experienced these voices as a young woman. Okay? And she beat them by saying, that's a lie, because they're consummate liars. 98% of what they say is lies. All they want to do is trigger that negative emotional energy. They don't care how they do it. Right? So one is, when you get a negative thought about yourself or anybody else, counter it with, that's a lie. Number two is realize that every thought that comes into your mind doesn't belong to you. Swedenborg says none of your thoughts are your own. They either come in from the light side, the heavenly side, or they come in from the dark side. You are the chooser. Even schizophrenics, you choose what you listen to. You choose what you pay attention to. And where you put your attention is where you put your energy. So when you put your attention on a particular thought, you are giving it energy. So like the Indians say, you have two wolves, one on each shoulder. The one that you feed is the one that's going to grow. You have to watch your thoughts. Know that they don't come from you, especially the negative ones about yourself or anybody else. Your mind is like it's like a radio receiver. You tune to a certain frequency, and those thoughts come in. With schizophrenics, that frequency has been turned to a very low vibration. And if you try to turn it up, the voices turn it back down again.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier about how you need to replace the negative with the positive, or or with something better, because I've been noticing recently in the various modalities that I use, and in order to get a really positive result. Yes, we need to look at what is, what is not good, what is negative, what is, dark in our consciousness. And that is very important to face that and acknowledge it. But then we need to replace. It has to be replaced with something else.
Well, the other thing is, like I was telling you about MACE, the mind is like a computer. Okay, so a person with psychological problems is like a computer with a virus. You can say all you want, oh, virus, go away. This is going to be a positive computer. That virus ain't going nowhere. Okay. Same way with the mind. Unless you get in there and you discharge that trauma, it's going to keep reactivating over and over again. And one of the most common is I'm worthless. I'm no good. I mean, I don't know how many times that comes up. I talked to a guy from Alaska this morning. 47 years he's had that thought. It ruined his life.
Yeah.
And we got rid of it in an hour. It was gone. Totally gone.
Brilliant. I just want to validate what you're saying, Jerry, from a couple of perspectives. One is there's a lot of people who are becoming or have been aware of energies or frequencies and vibrations, and they all talk about this raising of the vibration versus the lowering of the vibration into fear or fight or flight or all of those things, and resilience and resilience and calmness lift us into the choice of the lighter side. So I think a lot of people will resonate with what you're saying. But my tradition of psychotherapy is actually transactional analysis. And that came from Eric Berne. Now, Eric Berne in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, he was working in psychiatric hospitals, and he was curing people, interestingly, with something, not so much energetically. He wasn't switched on to that in that day, but he talked about adult reality, checking out reality from the adult ego state, which is the here and now part of us, not the archaic part of our parental judgments or the archaic parts of our childhood wounds or past wounds and traumas and experiences, but from the adult part, which he regarded as the only part of us that functions in the here and now. Is that true? And he used to walk into psychiatric wards and do group therapy, and he used to say, "Why are you acting so crazy? Why are you acting crazy when you can see that what you're saying is not true?" He said, "Look at the chair, look at the windows, look at what you." And he used to bring people into, and he used to believe that they could get better by just checking out reality. And I would say in 40 years of practice, almost the universal technique that I have used that has had the most success is I've simply said to people, is that true? And that's exactly what you're saying. Is it real? Is it true? And I would say that where are you putting your focus? And that's what you've said. That's a lie. Where are you going to choose to get your information from the light side or the dark side? And I just want to validate what you've said, what you've discovered. I think your journey, Jerry, has been remarkable. And I really want to honor you for your journey, because you've had to go against psychiatrists, you've had to go against academia, you've had to fight left, right, and center. And clearly your mother, I think you said your mother brought you up to not trust authority. Did you say that, or did I make that up?
It was more on my father's side than my mother's side.
On your father's side. So you were brought up to question authority, and so they prepared you for this journey rather beautifully, I think. And your ability to ask really clear questions, like how can it be a hallucination if it's a regular logical pattern? It follows a very clear pattern repeatedly. So I just want to honor you, Jerry. I want to honor you for your great life and what you've done. And I hope it goes on a lot longer. And I just want to honor your work, because I think you are hitting something that we need to hear. And I think many people, many people in the comments are resonating with what you said.
One question actually that somebody has asked that they really want it answered. So if I could read it again. She says, I really want to know whether Jerry has asked what the patients are saying to the voices when they argue with the voices. It seems an important missing question. Jerry seems to be assuming that the patient's arguments with the voices are coming from a unitary self.
Well, you know what popped to mind as soon as I heard that question? I remember one female patient actually walking off of the grounds of the psychiatric hospital, arguing with her voices, saying, I don't want to do this. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to get in trouble. So here she is arguing with the voices as she's walking off of the grounds. Right. So what they do is they say awful stuff about them. You're no good. You're stupid. You're ugly. You're rotten. Nobody likes you. Okay. And you know, if somebody said that to you, you'd just probably start arguing with them. You know, you're not going to just sit there and take it. You know? So the patient knows that at some level that these things are slowly trying to take control of them, and they're fighting back. The only way they know how is with arguing with them. But they got to be careful because, you know, there is no positive benefit to letting others know about these voices. You know, first of all, they're going to lose all their friends. You tell your friends, oh, I'm hearing these voices. They're telling me all these awful things. Your friends are going, well, you're weird. I'm getting away from you. You tell your parents, they drag you into the psychiatrist's office. You're not going to come out of there without some kind of diagnosis and some kind of toxic pill. All right. And then that's going to make you feel worse. You know, so there is no positive benefit to actually talking about these voices to the schizophrenic. So what they do is they keep them to themselves. And I don't know how many times I've seen schizophrenics lie to psychiatrists. I knew their voices were strong. I knew that they were persistent. And when they met the psychiatrist would ask them, well, how are the voices? And they go, oh, they're okay. They're less. They did not want to be drugged more. So they would actually lie to the psychiatrist because they didn't like those drugs and they wouldn't take them. Now, eventually, they will go off those drugs. And what I found out is that the voices are pointing to the side effects of those medications. They're toxic. There's a whole pages of negative side effects to these antipsychotic drugs. The voices are pointing to those side effects and saying the psychiatrist is poisoning you. Now, what I saw when I started at the state hospital was psychiatrists were being assaulted at a rate much higher than virtually anybody else on the staff, except for attendant staff that were with these psychiatric patients 24 hours a day. And I was wondering, how could that possibly be? Because they're only spending 15, 20 minutes a month with these people. What are they saying in 15 or 20 minutes that are causing these patients to attack them? It took me 7 years to figure that out. One girl finally told me, the voices are telling me that these drugs that the psychiatrists are giving are toxic and they're poison. So that's what the voices are telling psychiatric patients. You're being poisoned by the psychiatrist. That's why their assault rate is 5 times higher than any other doctor. Their suicide rate is just as high as schizophrenics. And these are the people that run the Western mental health system. Their suicide rate is just as high as the schizophrenic suicide rate, 5 times higher than the general population.
So the voices are telling the patients that they don't want the drugs because then they become weaker. They can't control the patient.
They become weaker. They don't want, they want to upset the patient as much as possible. They want that negative emotional energy. And what the drugs do is kind of dumb them down. You know, they don't react as volatile. They don't get as angry. They don't get in as many fights. They're doped up. They're drugged down. The voices don't want that. They want them angry. They want them vicious. They want them fighting. They want that negative emotional energy. That's what they feed off of. And again, they hit us all.
Somebody commented, because we got a lot of chat, we can't go through it all, but somebody said, you know, this is a spiritual war that we're in at the moment, and that the the media have been, if I can find it, the politicians, mainstream media, big pharma are all hijacked by negative entities. So, you know, it is, you know,
well, they are. If you get this list of 23 patterns that the voices run, there's a 1-to-1 correlation between what the voices are telling schizophrenics and what is coming out of mainstream media right now. There's a 1-to-1 correlation. It's the exact same entities on a macroscopic scale.
That's very interesting.
Troy, sorry, Kim, I thought you finished. Troy,
No, I was
can
going
I
to
come
say,
in?
yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, Troy's come in and said something very interesting. He's talked about, I've worked with people, someone hearing voices, and they were aggressive and nasty, but he managed to negotiate and talk to the voices, and they became allies. The voices eventually became helpful and friendly, and I've heard of this in other cases. Have you heard of this?
No, the only thing I've seen is that when they're threatened, they will back off and they will fake like they're good, like they're trying to help the person. And when they start off, they'll do that. So people playing with Ouija boards, they think that's a toy. That thing is very dangerous. I mean, they start off talking to these spirits. They have no idea what they're talking to or who they're talking to. And I've seen time after time after time with prisoners where that voice, whatever they're talking to on that Ouija board, jumps into their head and it stays there. And it tries
Yes.
to convince them that it's some kind of positive spirit, some saint or something. Once they give it permission to stay there, that's it. Then it will turn on them. It'll slowly turn on them.
This is so true. My goodness, we could go on talking for hours, Jerry. I just think maybe if there's enough feedback from people that we might ask you to come back and talk more, because this is such
Sure.
This crosses so many thresholds of not only psychiatry, psychology, and health and politics, but also, the issue of spirituality, and I would say also, from what you've just said, spiritual ignorance. That we're a very uneducated bunch spiritually in general. As a we've been dumbed down around spirituality, and it is a growing concern of the Mind Health group here in how we address the issue of spirituality without offending people, without telling people what they should and shouldn't believe. We're actually having a very vibrant discussion amongst ourselves in the background about this very issue of kind of how do we discuss different spiritual perceptions, because we are entering the realm of spiritual energy, aren't we?
Yes, you are. And you look at the Bible, 23 times in the Bible, Jesus has cast these entities out of people and they've recovered. But nowadays it's like, oh, we're the modern age. These things don't exist anymore. We're in the scientific age. Science is everything. You look at the COVID, listen to the science. No, they're still here.
I think it would be quite interesting maybe if Jerry came back and talked a bit about the MACE method, shared more about that.
I think that'd be really interesting.
You know what? I can do that, and I can bring the chief trainer on also if we have enough time. I'm scheduled into June right now, but maybe sometime in June, I could get Sherry Hatfield. She personally knew John Mace. He's dead now, but she personally knew him for years. And both of us could come on and tell people about the Mace energy method.
Can I just somebody's back to the question that I read out before. I just need to say this because I can feel this person's probably feeling a little bit frustrated. She says, Jerry is missing the meaning of my question and he's not properly answering it. Has he made a similar study of the alternative voices inside the patient's heads? He is so focused on one set of voices. Sorry, the chat keeps moving. It's hard to read it. There are so many alternative explanations to the warfare going on in patients' heads. I'm also someone who has worked with schizophrenic people.
Okay, valid question. What I've seen is that very seldom do the positive voices speak in English, just like we're talking now. They speak more in feelings, intuition, and serendipity. So it's kind of like, hey, don't do that. That's not right, kind of thing. Now, I have seen from time to time, it's not common, where there was one patient I was working with who was talking to his mother who was deceased. He was in the prison and his mother would be with him, periods of time during the day. Now, I was extremely suspicious and I was always asking him, what's your mother telling you? Because if they say one bad thing, that I would eliminate them, because the bad ones are always trying to act like they're good. Okay. No, there wasn't anything, I'd ask him, well, what's your mother telling you today? Wear clean underwear. Don't buy drugs. Don't hang out with gangsters. Make your bed, go to school. Don't fight with the guards. Stuff that mothers would say. Okay. Never did that voice say anything bad. And he would hear it like you hear me talking. So he did fully recover. Okay. Got rid of the voices. And it was like one of the, they were transferring me to another unit. They didn't like what I was doing. They didn't know what it was, but they figured they'd just get me out of there anyway. So one of the last sessions I had with him, he comes back and he goes, "My mother wants to talk with you." So here's again another spirit wanting to talk to me. And I'm like, "Well, okay. What's she got to say?" He said, "She's thanking you. She's thanking you for helping me." And I said, "No problem. Glad to do it." And I asked her, I said, "What are you doing over there?" She said, "I'm checking people in." So she was like a secretary checking people in. I went to ask her another question, and she responded with, "Everything. I'm not supposed to be talking to you. Everything you need to know is in the Bible." And that's the last I heard from her. Now, about a month later, the mother disappeared, and this patient never heard from her again. So, and there are times where positive voices do come. Where I ran into that the most was when I was working in the ER with these people who come in and had made a very serious suicide attempt. Okay, there was this one lady I remember. She lost her job. She was about to get thrown out of her apartment. She had a teenage son. She got a divorce. Everything went wrong with her life. So she goes, "I've had it. I'm going to go out to the railroad track. I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to drive my car in front of a train." So she's sitting there in the railroad track waiting for the train to come by. Okay. So talking to her sister in San Diego, telling her sister goodbye. The train comes. She's drugged up. She's drunk. She drives her car in front of this train, and the train smashes it, throws it onto another track. A second train come and hit it a second time and threw it 50 yards off the road. That car was such a smashed up piece of like a crushed Coke can that they had to cut her out of it. She could not get out. They had to cut her out. And I remember asking her, I said, "What were you thinking when you came to and you were still alive?" She said, "I was absolutely furious." She said, "I did not want to be alive. I did not want to be here." And I said, "Well, what, what was going on while you were in that car?" She said, "I felt this strong, very peaceful presence just come over me." She said, it felt like taking 2 or 3 shots of liquor, just very mellow. And it said, "Everything's going to be all right." So here she is sitting in front of me in the ER 2 hours after being hit by 2 trains, and all she had was a black eye. That was it, a black eye. She got hit by 2 trains. Her car was completely decimated. And after evaluating her, I went, "I don't think she's suicidal anymore. I think she's learned her lesson." So I wrote it up and said, "Yeah, I think she's safe to go." Now, I never thought psychiatry would go with that. I was virtually certain they would not let her out. They let her out. Another guy, 357 Magnum, all cylinders loaded, puts the gun to his head, click, puts it to the ground, bang, to his head, click, to the ground, bang. He goes, "Okay, I got it." That's how the positive sides acts. Serendipity, conscience, feelings. They don't just come out like these guys. Now, nor do the psychotic voices sound like, "Where are the psychotic voices?" No, they sound just like all the thousands of other thoughts you have running through your head on any particular day. Their intent is very different. They don't have your same intent, but they sound just like all your other thoughts. So it makes it easy for them to get in there. They also have access to all the negative things that you've ever done. They can bring those up from your memory and they can throw them in your face and keep rubbing them in your face until you turn negative. It's a very powerful enemy.
I mean, what you're saying is really makes us really reconsider, who am I? What are the voices in my head? What are the thoughts in my head that I have every day? It really makes one look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, and like I was saying, I had one patient who, when he realized that those thoughts weren't him, he said, "That's good. That's all I need." It makes a big difference when the schizophrenic realizes that they are not hallucinations, that there's something they can do about them, that they don't have a chemical imbalance in their brain. And, what psychiatry is doing to the entire planet right now is despicable. It's absolutely despicable. It's lie after lie after lie after lie. And their DSM is a total lie too. Every single one of those diagnoses in the DSM was completely made up. There is not a single test to verify a single one of them. They're made up by a group of psychiatrists that meet once every few years. They make up these diagnoses. 2/3 of them are in cahoots with big pharma. So they go, oh, what kind of diagnosis can we make up now that we can make some kind of drug and make a profit off it? And listen to some of the crap they got. Mathematics disorder. If you don't like mathematics, you're disordered. Sibling relational disorder. If 2 kids are fighting in the living room, they're disordered. They got a sibling relational disorder.
They'll label everything.
They label everything.
Defiance disorder, adolescent defiance disorder.
Oppositional defiant disorder. You agree with your mom. You're oppositionally defiant. 3.90. We'll give you some drug for it.
Jerry, we could go. I keep saying this. We could go on for hours. It has been such an honor and a privilege to have you on this show, to join us and to share your great experience. I mean, listen, it's just obvious that everything we discuss, your depth of clinical experience with some really tortured people who've been suffering from what you're describing for so long, it just comes out in story after story. And I just want to say that that's only possible. They just come at the click of a finger because of your life spent dedicated to serving and helping these people. Bless you. Thank you. We'll have you back. I'll tell people that we'll have you back. And I think that we're just so grateful to have you. We need to close off. Is there any last remaining thing you want to say before we close off? Give you a last statement.
I have a lot more information on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. I've got interviews with schizophrenics. I've got interviews with nurses, psych nurses. I've got interviews with people who are hearing voices or have heard voices, people who've recovered from voices. jerrymarzinsky.com. Just go there, go to the articles. There's a bunch of articles. There's probably hundreds of videos. Take your
pick. The videos are very interesting. I can't remember the guy's name, but you were on a podcast with the guy who was like a real life One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where he was put into a unit, and there was nothing wrong with him. That was very interesting.
Yeah, that's the closest One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as I've ever seen.
The other bit is, of course, the Beautiful Mind, the film A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe acting as a schizophrenic, and at the end there's a beautiful scene where he knows that the voices are not him. So he turns to a young student. I love this scene. He turns to a young student and he says, "Just excuse me 1 minute." And he's been talking to a student. He turns to someone else and says, "Is there someone standing there?" Because he's just not sure, and he checks out reality. And if there's any takeaway for people that I think resonates with, to summarize in some way what you've said, is this thing about, the voices that are destructive are not you, they're voices. And you can challenge those voices. And you can challenge the lie. So you can work with truth. And you can also work with the reality. So you work with what other people also can see and feel. You can literally ground yourself in phenomenological reality, the phenomenon of our reality, not the thoughts or the theories, but the phenomenon, the actuality of the reality here and now. And I just want to summarize what you've said, which is already incredibly valuable. And we will invite you back. Do any of the panel want to say anything before we close to Jerry as a thank you or an appreciation or anything? You're silent, Delinda.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I think that this is something that obviously has a lot of interest and a lot of energy around it. So I think we may have you back. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. If it wasn't for people like you, this wouldn't get out, because you're not going to have the mainstream put this out. The psychiatric mafia is not going to put this out. Big pharma is not going to put this out. They're making $14.7 billion a year on antipsychotic drugs worldwide. Not million, billion. And these drugs are destroying people's brains. These people are unconscionable.
I was given antidepressants when I was in hospital for a couple of weeks, and I took it once and just could feel the difference, and just said, "Nah, not taking them anymore."
Yeah, they don't cure anything. Those drugs cure nothing. All they do is dope you down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Donna Carl has given us the most wonderful statement on which to finish this session, which is the medicine of madness. Well done,
Yeah.
Donna.
See, they don't make any money curing people. They make money keeping them sick, dishing out those drugs.
And Hiram has put, the mainstream wants to divorce us all from spirituality, and that is, apparently the ultimate game. And I highly recommend there's a podcast called Veil of Reality where he goes deeply into this topic, what we've been talking about, the entities and the Wetiko and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Jennifer's talking about, also the talk of burnt out schizophrenics, people who've been dumbed by medication and the trauma and all their trauma responses, that this sense of kind of, isn't it interesting? I mean, look, we could go on. I'm going to shut up. Look, we need to stop and say goodbye to everyone. So thank you. The chat and the comments have been so thrilling. I'm so sorry we haven't been able to keep up with you. It's been phenomenal what's been going in. Thank you so much. We'll come back to this subject again. It's clearly one that is a hot topic. So thank you so much. Everyone who's joined us and watching us, and if you're watching us on the replay, thank you. We'll hopefully have more on this. So let's wave goodbye to everybody. Let's all do a wave. Bye-bye, everyone.
Please consider making a value exchange with us. The World Council for Health is a grassroots people's organization, and we rely on funding from people just like you. Your contributions from as little as $5 or £5 or 100 Rand help to power our work. The World Council for Health team is on a mission to serve you. Please make it your mission to support us. Thank you.